All right, so in this episode, we're gonna go ahead and install this bad boy, a 22-gallon ATL fuel cell, into the rear of the Mustang using a custom mounting solution. All right, let's get into it. All right, so here's what we're working with here at the rear of the car. As you can see, we still got the full spare tire area in. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna cut this out, this whole, this whole spare tire area, because over there up against the wall we have a bunch of 16 gauge metal or sheet metal, steel, and that's gonna go here. I'm gonna make a new bulkhead that replaces this drop part, and then I'm gonna cut out a hole for that ATL fuel cell in the middle of it. And then I'll build a box that we drop into that hole, and then that goes into the hole. So reason being is I don't want that to be what sticks out the bottom of the car, to be the first thing that takes impact and takes the wear and tear of things like weather and rust and corrosion, all that kind of stuff. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna build basically a box within a box to drop this in. So there's gonna be a box that I have at the bottom of this that we drop that into, and then on the top here I'm gonna run two main supports that go over that to kind of strap it down, in addition to using all the bolts in it to tie it into the car. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on that. First things first, we're gonna go ahead and cut the spare tire mount out, get us some more room, and then we'll go get that 36 by 36 inch piece of steel and start kind of measuring it out and creating a template and start to tackle that. All right, so before I went ahead and started cutting, I just wanted to throw the rear subframe up and see how it interacts with the spaces back here. Definitely glad I did. So I was originally hoping I could have mounted the fuel cell, which would have put the front of it about right here, which clears the subframe, but it doesn't clear the anti-sway bar, or the rear sway bar. The rear sway bar runs along this plane right here, which means that about the closest the front of the fuel cell can be is about equal to this bolt, and it's equivalent bolt over there. So that puts it pretty far backwards. So I'm definitely glad I went ahead and got that and double checked it and didn't start cutting holes where I shouldn't, like an idiot. All right, so now that we know that, we've confirmed it, I'm gonna go ahead and start grab the cutoff wheel and cut off the spare tire well out of the car, get this opened up, and then we can start to investigate how we want to put the that bulkhead that I was talking about in. All right, so I'm getting started here with the angle grinder, just cutting this big old square out. Just trying to make sure right here at this part near the back of the car, just trying to get it cut as close as possible, and then once I get that out of the way, I just grind it smooth. All right, for the rear bulkhead area, basically what I did is I took the measurements of what I had just cut out and I added an inch in every direction. This would give me enough meat there and enough overlap so that I could weld to the existing chassis. It would weld into the meaty part where the frame rails were underneath the car, so I wasn't welding into one layer of metal, but a couple. So when I went to do a test fit in the car, I realized that the back panel actually has a pretty decent curvature to it on the edges here, right on the corners. So I went and grabbed a Sharpie, I traced the profile of it. That allowed me to take it back to the cutting table, cut those corners, and get a much better fit. And then when I came back and fit it, it fit great. So then it was time to take it back over to my table and start to bend this tab over, so this would be the part I actually weld to the to the chassis of the car. So I started by clamping it down on a straight edge on my welding table, took my sledgehammer and pounded it over old school style, since I don't have access to a brake big enough for this. Then for the corners here, they needed to be at a slight angle, so I cut some slits on them, whacked them over, and then went back to the car for a test fit. All right, so got the bulkhead installed, really happy with how it came out. It's super sturdy. As you can see, it's not gonna go anywhere or move. For install, I did a stitch weld about every 2 inches or so around these 3 edges. And then for this part that I bent back here, I welded from underneath, which I'll show you what that looks like. So ignore the box in here, because I'm doing this after I did all the work. But basically, I just want to show you what it looked like under here. So you can see I have this little tab. Let's see if I can get you better visibility. There we go. So you can see I have this tab, and I just stitch welded it to this back plate. So you can see what it looks like back here. Nice and secure, not going anywhere. Tons of rigidity. So I was really happy with how that came out. All right, now it's time to get started on that outer box. So this will be what you see from the outside of the car, underneath, and this will be what protects the fuel cell from the exposure to the elements. Basically 4 sides with a 1-inch tab bent on the top to hold it in, and that'll be what we weld to the car. All right, I don't know how well you can see it because of the lighting, but I've marked out what I need to cut out, kind of the square that I need to cut out of the bulkhead, and then that's gonna go over there to the box that I started to create to act as the bottom, weld it to the bottom, and then I'll be able to drop that box in here. All right, with that cut out, I was able to put a bottom on my box here, so then I could begin finish welding. So basically, I just went around and I threw a bunch of different little tacks. This is thin metal. It can't take a lot of heat, so it was just a lot of different little tacks to spread the heat out. I then went and grabbed the grinder, and I grinded it all smooth, so it's a nice smooth finish that looks nice and clean. All right, with that outer shell built, it's now time to work on the cage that's going to mount the fuel cell to the actual car. So what I did is I went and grabbed some 1x3 square tubing and tack welded this together as a pretty tight fit to the fuel cell. And the reason being is the flange that I'm going to be bolting through on this ATL fuel cell isn't very wide. And what this means is the bolts, they don't actually go into the middle of the width of this square tubing. It puts the bolt holes very close to the edge. So what I had to do is I had to get it as tight as possible to get them as close to the middle of the tubing as possible. And then I marked the holes, or I marked where I needed to drill, drilled them out, and then moved over here to my drill press and had to use the step bit, because in a lot of cases I was actually welding very close, if not right on the edge there. And so what I did is I grabbed some nuts and went to the TIG welder, and I TIG welded these into the actual tubing. So this essentially created a nice thick threaded area I could bolt into that would be really strong, but it also allowed me to put the threads very close to the edge here so that I could get that nice interference fit I needed. Once I was done with that, it was ready to reassemble, and to do that I actually went and grabbed some bolts and bolted these pieces onto the fuel cell itself. This would ensure when I tack welded it together, all of my bolt holes lined up. This took forever. I was so ready to be done with it at this point. This was so much longer than I expected. So finally, we were ready to weld it together. All right, so ready to go with the install here, or I should say all the parts are together and I'm ready to do kind of the final install. So I have the kind of outer shell that goes in here. That's all prepped and ready to weld into the chassis. And then to mount the cage structure that is over there, I have made these backing plates with some M12 size nuts on them, and they tie into the frame rails that go underneath the car here. So that's how it's going to be secured. The outer shell is going to be secured to this bulkhead fitting, and then that will bolt into those little tabs right on each end there, and there on the 4 corners. They'll bolt into those that are welded to the chassis on the underside. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the outer shell and weld that in. And then I'm going to drop that in and bolt it to these to hold these in place, tack weld them in on the bottom, then remove the bolts, and then finish weld around and fully weld it to the chassis. And then we'll be done outside of just getting ready to paint stuff. All right, let's do it. And it finally feels like we're getting near the end of this project. This one has taken so much longer than I expected. I thought this would be a couple-day fabrication project, and here I am like 2 weeks into it of working a couple hours after work every night. But we're finally getting there. To weld this in, I basically ran 1-inch stitches around all 4 edges of this guy. Nice tight fit. Everything worked great. It's not going anywhere. Did a nice test fit here of the cage. made sure everything's, you know, in the right place and fits right. And then I marked the holes here for the 4 mounting holes. So I remember those little plates with the nuts welded on them that I showed in the earlier clip. I'm now, you know, placing those and going underneath the car and tack welding them in place. All right, so it's been a couple days. I've had a chance to paint the cage and steel it gray, and I just wanted to give you a quick look at some of the things I talked about in the voiceover. So if you look here, you can see what I mean where these holes aren't at halfway. So if you look about right there, right where my fingernail is the edge of this 1x3. So you can see the holes are very close to the edge here. So that is just one of many reasons I wasn't able to use a rivet nut. Not to mention the welded nuts was just a better approach. But ultimately, I'm really happy with how this thing came out. Taking a quick look, the welds I thought came out pretty good. It's super strong. The fitment's really good. You know, it's not going to go anywhere. It's held in by those giant 12mm thread bolts. So those are 12mm is the size of the threaded part, and it's the fine thread bolt. So it's plenty strong. That's bolted, you know, through this layer into, you know, it's bolted through the bulkhead layer, the layer underneath the bulkhead layer, and then the frame rail, or the, you know, the edge of the frame rail is under that. So like it's going through a lot. And then of course the nut under there is welded to a reinforcement plate, and the plate is welded to the chassis. So it's definitely not going anywhere. If there's a, you know, if God forbid this car does get in an accident, but it makes it super easy to remove out of the chassis, so for servicing and various other things. So really happy with how that came out. Nice clean install. I think we're ready to go. So I think that's going to do it. All right, so I think that's going to do it for this video. Things like wiring and painting that kind of whole area of the car will come in a later video. But thank you, Sal, for the idea on how to mount this. I thought it came out really great. I think, you know, the fact that it has an outer box really makes it look nice from outside the car / underneath the car. You won't just see a bunch of scaffolding or this, you know, bright red ATL fuel cell, stuff like that. So I think this was a nice, secure solution that's going to look good, function very well, protect the fuel cell, and make it nice and serviceable. So in the next video, we're going to go ahead and create an enclosure for the dry sump oil tank. Hopefully I'll catch you in that one. Otherwise, peace.